and then we'll figure it out from there.
Okay.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Claire Britton Lang. I work with Westward Whiskey, and we are excited to be with you all tonight to talk about Westward Whiskey and American Single Malt, and have Miles Monroe, who is a partner in the brand as well as the lead distiller and blender. Have him talk everybody through the tasting. The kits that you receive should have 4 samples, as well as the malted barley, a malted barley chocolate bar, and a blend sharing glass. So if you receive the kit, you should get that out and be ready to start tasting. And then, I think my understanding is that it's fairly interactive. So feel free to ask Miles questions, as he goes through everything. And I think, Miles, why don't you just start with a little bit of your background and history, experiences so far, and then we'll go through the core 4 and talk about American Single Malt as a category in particular, and maybe any new intel that you might have on the TTB.
Sure thing. Yeah, thanks, Claire. Sure.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Okay, it sounds like the background noise stopped. It sounds like maybe someone wasn't on mute and their phone was in their pocket. I'm not sure. But yeah, so I'm Miles Monroe. I'm the head distiller and head blender for Westward Whiskey. We're here in Portland, Oregon. I'm actually coming to you live from our barrel house, just a few miles away from the distillery. This is where we keep everything aging until it's ready to be bottled. So Westward has been around since 2004. We're kind of an OG of the craft world. We're also a pioneer in this category, which is at this point somewhat of an established but still emerging category of American single malt. Of course, here in the States, we're known for bourbon quite a bit, and then rye as well. But there's been a few of us making single malt for some time now, and actually quite a few distilleries now and brands that are joining us and making American single malt, and yeah, really establishing this really fun, cool new category where we're really taking what I consider the world's whiskey, which is malt whiskey. Malt whiskey is made all over the planet. Not just Scotland, Ireland, of course Japan, but India, Australia, Israel, Southeast Asia. Malt whiskey is made everywhere. And, here at Westward, so we're in the Pacific Northwest. In the Pacific Northwest is actually where you find most of the barley grown for malting in this country. And so for us, it makes sense to make a single malt. These are the ingredients that we have right here in our own backyard. And so we take our inspiration from our surroundings and our climate in that way. For everybody who did get the kit, as Claire said, if you haven't broken it out yet, please get it and pour your first sample, which is Westward American Single Malt, what we call our original malt whiskey. I'm not sure what your samples look like. If you've got this turquoise blue label, that's your one. You should go ahead and pour that out. That's your first sample that we're going to start with. And we should just jump right in. I always say, when I'm giving a whiskey tasting or even attending a whiskey tasting, it seems like there's a lot more talking than there is tasting. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. And if you've got some whiskey in your glass, I want to say cheers. Cheers from Westward. Claire did also mention that this seems like maybe this is kind of like a free-form style. So yeah, if you want to chime in at any point with some questions, I love that. Like I said, I'm the head distiller, so I've got all the answers. But yeah, Westward is an American single malt that we say, speaks of its origins, that actually has provenance. I mentioned before that, the majority of barley grown for malting in the country is grown right here in the Pacific Northwest, and we use that. All of the grain we use is grown here in the Pacific Northwest. Our maltster is actually just a few miles away from the distillery, malting the grain for us, which is fantastic. Gives us really excellently quality malts. Really nice flexibility with them too, if we need to change something with the malt. But what we're using is a 2-row barley. This is what brewers call a base malt. This is 2-row malted barley, basically what craft brewers use. And we at Westward are very inspired by craft beer. We're actually all ex-brewers. The founder, Christian, myself, my director of operations, most of my distillers all come from brewing. You may know this or not, but in Portland, we have over 80 breweries in the metro area. Big fans of beer here. And of course, again, the barley, is grown here. Hops are also grown very close right here in the Yakima Valley. Really great hop growing region. So yeah, I mean, essentially, we're very much inspired by beer. We are brewers making single malt, which if you think about it, I mean, single malt whiskey is beer first. Um, we also use an ale yeast to ferment out, which is pretty atypical for an American distillery. We actually use what brewers call the Cali yeast. It's the Sierra Nevada Pale Ale yeast strain. And this for us really brings a lot of the character in Westward. This is a lot of what we get in the flavor here. So, as you're sipping on this first sample, of course, kind of nosing it, giving it a good taste before you dive in, you get a lot of nice floral and honey and fruit notes. Do we have a question? Oh. So, yeah, original. Again, heavily inspired by beer. Our fermentation process is actually much like a beer as well. It's a very slow, low temperature fermentation, 96 to 120 hours, which is an eternity for an American whiskey fermentation. Most fermentations for whiskey in this country are, 36 hours, maybe 48 tops. It's a quick fermentation. It's a hot fermentation. But it also creates a lot of off flavors. And that's really not something that we want. That's not something we're really interested in doing with Westward. We take this approach of, I liken it to minimalist cooking, where we start with these excellent raw ingredients. We treat them well. We don't manipulate them too much. And so that really comes through in the final product. And the yeast has a lot to do with that. This brewer's yeast adds so much in the way of esters, which are the organic acids that really make whiskey very sweet. Same with beer as well. There's fruit, floral, and honey notes. All that comes from the fermentation. When we're done with that fermentation, then we get to our distillation side. Now, Westward is double pot distilled, meaning that we use only pot stills, and we run through 2 different pot stills, one after the other. But what's unique about our pot stills, they're actually custom made for us. They're made by Van Dome Copper and Brass Works down in Louisville, Kentucky. Pretty famous still maker down there. And they're custom stills in that they're very low reflux pot stills, meaning that they have a very squat column. And so there isn't a lot of reflux. And so a lot of that original character from the grain and from the fermentation comes through that distillation process. And that's why it's so important that we start with these great ingredients and treat them the way we do. Because these low reflux pot stills will really, it's an unforgiving way of making whiskey. All of your fermentation sins will come to the forefront in these stills that really leave no room for error. But yeah, so then once we're done with distillation, we're actually going into charred new American oak barrels. This is something you see a lot with whiskey in the United States, but really not with whiskey in many other places. And so in that way, Westward really is a hybrid of styles. We're inspired by beer. We're making the whiskey like a Scotch, but then we're aging it like a bourbon in that, we're putting our new make into charred new American oak barrels, meaning these barrels have never been filled before. So you get a lot of nice oak character in the whiskey as well. Those nice vanilla and coconut and baking spice notes, all that's coming from the barrel. You can see that there's no age statement with Westwards. We like it that way. We say that, it's aged to taste, that it's ready when it's ready. And for me, that can be 4.5 years, that can be 6 years, that can be 8 years. Depends on the barrel and how it's been aging. But we like Westward to be really bright and robust and have those nice ripe fruit notes. And that's something you get with, whiskey that's matured in a shorter amount of time. And being here in Oregon, I feel like we have the ideal environment for aging the type of single malt that we make. We've got these long, wet, cool winters here. We get a lot of rain. See about 30% more rain than the national average. But it never gets that cold. It rarely gets below 45 degrees Fahrenheit, which is where aging will actually stall and come to a stop when it gets below that temperature. And then, we've got 4 distinct seasons in our summers. As short as they are, they're hot and they're very dry. So we get 4 very distinct changes in our seasons. And so we get year-round aging. And so this new make going into these charred new oak barrels, really goes in a really beautiful state already. We actually call the new make barley eau de vie at the distillery. It's already just really clean, got a ton of great flavor, really nice character. And so when we go into the barrel, we're mostly looking for balance. We're looking for a balance between extracting oak and those different components from the wood and that oxidation of the whiskey as it ages. And so, yeah, I mean, what you're sipping now is about 6 years old, and then Westward's ready to go into the bottle. So that's kind of a brief start to finish as far as our production process goes. I'm also the head blender. My assistant and I will go through dozens and dozens of barrels that we think are mature. We'll pick about 40 out of that, and then we'll go through those more in depth. We'll take in-depth tasting notes. We'll really do a nice sensory evaluation of those. And out of those 40, we'll only pick about 18 that goes into a bottling. So for each bottling of Westward that we do is only 18 barrels, which is, I mean, far beyond small batch, micro batch. I don't even know what you would call that. It's just the smallest amount of barrels that go into this that make the cut for each and every bottling. And yeah, like I said, it's done by us. It's all done by hand. Even the distillation process, all done with sensory. Each and every one of our distillers, whoever it is that day, they are standing at the still, they are tasting, they are smelling, and they are the ones who decide when we make the cuts during the distillation process. It's not at a certain time or certain volume or certain temperature or proof. It's one of us actually standing there making the cut. So it truly is a handcrafted spirit that is a lot of fun to make. So we can move on to our second.
Miles,
got some questions here.
Yeah, so you use 2-row barley, right? Not the 6-row, not the
right.
one. Okay, and the barrels you source, the cooperage is in the Northwest or from the Midwest?
So the cooperage that we source from is Southern Midwest, independent stave company. So generally you find cooperages either near where most of the oak is or where most of the whiskey is. So a lot of cooperages, here are either down in southern Missouri near the Ozark Forest or around Kentucky, Tennessee, where the majority of distilleries are. And then, of course, there's some great cooperages in the Midwest as well. Minnesota has some really nice ones also. You don't see too many cooperages up here in the Northwest. There is actually the only Pacific Northwest cooperage is here in Oregon. They're called Oregon Barrel Works. And they're in the heart of wine country, and they're primarily making wine barrels. And so we source through independent stave. I use 18-month air-cured wood. So that's wood that's been aged for about 1.5 years outside, which is nice. It cures the wood, it leaches out a lot of the strong bitter tannins, and then they're made into staves. And we use a medium char for the barrels. That's what we like to use. So when you talk about
when you say medium char, is it level 1, level 2?
I was just gonna say, so it's a level 2 char. So when it comes to barrel charring, right, there's 1 through 4, 4 being the most extreme, 1 being the least. And so we're using primarily 2 char. Again, kind of trying to strike a balance between the grain and the fermentation flavors along with that wood. We don't want the wood to overtake too much. So we find that medium char is really nice. Adds just a nice amount of those flavors and characteristics that you get.
And so, do you use proprietary yeast or you use your yeast strain?
Yeah, our yeast strain is the what brewers call the Cali yeast. It's the Sierra Nevada Pale Ale yeast strain. So it's actually a brewer's yeast.
I guessed. That's why I asked you, because I was getting that on.
Yeah, and that's a big part of the flavor for us. You find a lot of people, especially whiskey makers in the States, saying that they want to see, 60, 70, sometimes 80% of the flavor of the characteristics of their whiskey coming from the barrel. And the other materials make up the rest. Whereas I'm saying the opposite of that. We flip that on its head. I want at least 70% of what you taste in Westward to come from the actual grain, the barley itself, from the fermentation. That yeast strain, that pale ale yeast strain is just so flavorful. It's got so much going on. I want you to taste a lot more of that, not just the barrel, kind of striking a balance between the two.
No, it shows a lot on nose. That's why I asked you the yeast, because it really it presents itself on nose really well.
Definitely. Yeah, some great aromatics on this for sure. And it's, again, it's a both a flavor driven thing. It's a provenance driven thing. I mean, there's this debate right now going on with whiskey where, people are wondering, can you have terroir in whiskey? And, some people say, well, it's a distilled product. So, once you go through that distillation process, you're kind of separating out some of those elements from where they actually came from. But we say that you can have terroir in whiskey. It just depends. It depends on how you treat it. It depends on what your processes are, what your raw materials are, how you age it. All those have a lot to do with it. And we say that Westward does speak of its origins. And I do think you get a lot of the raw material coming through in this specifically for that reason. And again, just having those really low reflux pot stills. I'll say, for example, so, when I say reflux, distillers, we're talking about refinement. We're talking about as we're distilling, that alcohol vapor is traveling up the column of the still. And when it gets towards the top, it's cooler. So it'll actually condense back into a liquid and drop back down into the still. So it's almost like a mini distillation. It's refining the spirit. And as a comparison, so, Westward's pretty heavy. It's a robust, big, bold whiskey, really kind of oily, really just nice on the palate. And a lot of that has to do with the size of our stills and the shapes of our column. So if you look at somewhere like Glenmorangie, right? So their stills, they have very, very, very tall columns. So they get a lighter spirit. And so, if you look at the total height of their stills, their column takes up probably 70% of the entire still height. Long, just very tall columns. So you get a lighter, more refined kind of lighter spirit. Whereas at Westward, our column is only about 30% of the total height of the still. So much less reflux, much less refinement, just big, bold flavors. And you get, again, a lot of that characteristic that you're getting from your wash, from your fermentation.
I can get the Macallan, it's very close to I mean, if I had to compare to one of the single malt scotches, this is more like Macallan in its overall presentation.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great observation for sure. And again, also just being brewers, understanding how much flavor you can add in those beginning parts of the process. We want that to come through. And that's part of our heritage. That's where we come from. That's our lineage here in Portland as well. We're a big beer city for sure. Which actually will lead me to our second sample, which if you haven't poured already, please do. That is the stout cask. That is Westward American Single Malt Stout Cask. That's that gray label. And this is our first of two finishes that we're going to try tonight for Westward. Again, heavily inspired by beer. Being ex-brewers, we really look to beer a lot for flavor development, for new ideas, for changing up the mash bill sometimes, and in this case, actually finishing in a barrel that's held beer. So Oregon Stout Cask Finish, this was first developed when I actually sent a recently emptied barrel of Westward to another brewery, a brewery that I actually used to work for here in Portland called Migration. And they wanted to age some of their Belgian chocolate imperial stout in this barrel. So I sent it their way, and we ended up with the barrel back when they were done. And obviously now after tasting Westward Original, you get those grainy, roasty, chocolatey notes that's already there in the whiskey. And so for me, thinking to finish this in a stout barrel just seemed like an excellent flavor match, really. So when you get Oregon Stout Cask, this barrel has been Westward first, then sent to a brewery and aged stout, and then sent back to me for an additional year of aging with the Westward. When I get the barrels back, we have the, luxury of living in a beer town where we can get these barrels back the same day they're emptied. So I asked the brewers not to rinse the barrels when they're done. So they'll rack out the beer, but there's this beautiful layer of stout that's still inside that cask. And I fill them up immediately with Westward. So yeah, going to pick up a lot of those nice roasty, chocolatey notes, some more of those floral notes that you can get from beer as well. And so, this one's a lot of fun. I get almond roca, toasted hazelnuts. I get both milk and dark chocolates. Just a lot going on here. And if you're a beer fan, especially, a fan of stouts and dark beers, then this is a fun way to sip Westward, definitely.
But it's lighter on the palate. What's the ABV on this one?
It's actually slightly higher. So original we tried, that's at 45%. The stout cask is at 46%.
Okay.
But I do find that it dries out a little bit in the barrel. That additional year in the barrel, also another year in the barrel that's now been filled twice, so that wood is going to be a little less assertive. It's going to be a little less heavy-handed with the vanilla and the coconut and the baking spice that you get typically from American oak. So yeah, it does dry it out a bit and make it a little lighter on the palate.
Okay.
And the reason that we bottle this at 46 rather than 45% is we never chill filter. We don't add color, and we never chill filter. But after this whiskey spends a year in a barrel that's held stout beer that hasn't been rinsed out, it's actually going to develop just a little bit of cloudiness. And so at a certain proof, that will kind of show up. But at 46%, it's still pretty clear. So that's our way of continuing to never chill filter and to just give you the whiskey in its purest form.
Well, what is the rate of evaporation in the Pacific Northwest?
Great question. Yeah, so when you talk about maturing spirits in barrels, you have evaporation, right? You have really volatile, high-proof spirit inside a barrel that breathes essentially, and so we call that, of course, the angel's share. But so in the Pacific Northwest, it's actually not that bad because again, we're kind of in between those two extremes. It's not very, very hot like you'd find down in Kentucky, Tennessee, or Texas, but it's also not very, very cold, like you'd find in Ireland or Scotland. We're kind of right in the middle there. So our first year in barrel, we lose about 6% of volume. But again, that's because we're going into new oak, and that new oak is dry and it's thirsty. It's going to soak up a lot of that whiskey. And then every year after that, it's about 3%.
Oh, that's not bad.
No, it's, yeah, we can live with that. It isn't terrible.
So that means you can do extended aging. You can go up to 10, 12 years.
Absolutely. Absolutely, we could. I think if we were going to do that after a few years, we transfer into some used barrels. I think obviously in colder climates, that's why you see a longer aging is, those winters, especially in Scotland, are so cold that the winters, aging is pretty much halted. They're not really aging very much in the winter, unless they're in a heated warehouse, which a lot of Scotch distilleries do. But during those colder months, there's really no aging going on, where, as I said before, we're seeing a full season of aging, all year round we get aging. But yeah, another interesting part of maturation here is we actually see a rise in proof over time. Our proof goes up. So we're not seeing massive evaporation, but we're also not somewhere so humid and so wet that the barrels are actually absorbing and taking on water like you see in Scotland or Ireland, where their proof goes down. Our proof actually goes up, and we lose water just a little faster than we do alcohol, which, if you're going to lose anything, lose water over whiskey, right? Yeah.
What proof do you enter barrel at? What's the barrel entry proof?
Our barrel entry proof is just under 125. Okay. And I actually I slowly proof down over time. So we proof down over the years, slowly. That's
any special water source or just a regular municipal water?
Our water source here is actually pretty special. So here in Portland, we're in the Willamette Valley. We're in a valley. We're between two mountain ranges. We have the coastal range to our west, which actually separates us from the Pacific Ocean, which influences a lot of our weather. And then to our east, we have the Cascade Mountains. And the Cascade Mountain Range is called the Cascades because there's just dozens and dozens and dozens of waterfalls all throughout these mountain ranges. And our water source here in Portland is directly from the Cascade Mountains. So it's snowmelt and it's rainfall coming down from the Cascade Mountains. So nice and soft, very clean, really, really fantastic water. And that's what we use. Yeah, it's excellent.
The stout is really good on finish. I wasn't so pleased with the nose, but on the finish, it's really great, really nice.
Glad you enjoy it. Well, in talking about the valley, and that kind of leads into our third sample, which is the Pinot cask, which is your sort of purple red label here. That's our sample number 3, Westward American Single Malt Pinot cask. So again, we're here in the Willamette Valley. And the Willamette Valley is pretty famous for its Pinot Noir. We've got some world-class winemakers here. Wine country is about 12 miles south of the distillery, pretty close in that area. And where they are, they're actually at the same latitude as Burgundy, France. And so that's why you see a lot of Chardonnay and Pinot Noir planted in this area, and has been since the late 50s. Also, a lot of the winemakers here go to Burgundy to study winemaking because, again, latitude, similar climate, those are the grapes that are grown here. And so in talking about, making single malts and expressing new flavors, finding new ways to make single malt delicious, of course, there's the ubiquitous port and sherry finishes, right? I feel like that's kind of it's where a lot of people go to these days, a PX sherry cask or a port finish. And for us, we talk about Oregon and our surroundings and our climates and how much that influences what we do. We're using locally grown barley. We're aging right here in our valley. And so for us, to make something that we thought would be a fun wine finish, that it's kind of a no-brainer to just turn to our own backyard where we have these incredible winemakers making really just outstanding Pinot Noir. So, instead of ordering a sherry barrel from halfway around the world, we turn to our own backyard and we have Oregon Pinot Noir.
Heavenly knows, heavenly. This is
a really fun one.
The taste is creamy. It's a mild, but yet it's refreshing.
Yeah, and so we're again so close to these makers that we can pick up these barrels the same day that they're emptied. So these are also not rinsed. What also is pretty interesting about this expression is it introduces a new element of wood, because winemakers here, they use French oak. These are actually the barrels right behind me, right? So winemakers are using French oak to age their wine in. And so, primary maturation in new charred white American oak. And then we're going into used French oak. And when you get the French oak, you're talking about softer tannins, herbaceous, grassy. I heard someone say creamy. You get those notes from that French oak for sure. The other interesting thing is most winemakers here, they'll fill 3 vintages in barrels before I get them. So 3 different times these barrels have held Pinot Noir. And so the staves are pretty well soaked with Pinot Noir by the time I get them. Actually, one winemaker told me that when they get the barrels empty new versus when they're empty and handed off to me, they're 10 pounds heavier. So there's just a lot of Pinot Noir in those staves, really just soaked through and through. And so much like the stout, this is an additional year of aging. Again, I just like to cycle through each of the seasons. I don't want the finish to be a flavoring. I want it to be integrated into the spirit. I want it to be part of Westward. I want it to be part of the single malt. So we'll do a full year of aging on that. And all those elements can really integrate and come together, because when it comes to these, stout and Pinot casks, I'm really just trying to highlight what's already there. So with the stout cask, you're getting those pronounced chocolate and roast and grain notes. They're in Westward, but they're just turned up a bit. And yeah, with the Pinot, it's that fruits, that grassiness, some of the nice spice from the barrel. You're getting that turned up in that as well. But to me, still Westward.
So do you have a minimum amount of aging, and then you start doing your tasting across the board until a certain point? How does that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's so we generally don't try to taste anything out of the barrel until at least 3 years.
Gotcha.
And then, once we hit 3 years, it's good to just check in with the barrel, taste things, see where they're at. But it's usually not until about 4.5 years that I feel like it's really starting to hit that sweet spot. But yeah, I mean, the first 3 or 4 years, it's just, it's on its way, So the French have a term for it called élevage, which means to literally to rear up a barrel, right? To raise a barrel up from immaturity to maturity, almost like you would a child. And so, yeah, those first 3-4 years, those are the young years. The barrel, the whiskey's still trying to figure out what's going on and where it's headed, and then eventually, all those elements come together in this really cohesive way and start to get some good magic there.
Miles, we have a question, well, 2-part question, I guess, on if you're able to share the winery partners for the Pinot cask. And the second part of the question is about like the color that it picks up, and Shay is surprised it's not redder. Is that because of the shorter maturation of the Pinot Noir cask, or is it because of the color of the Pinot Noir itself?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So we've actually, I think, only worked with maybe 3 or 4 different wineries. They're, friends of ours, or we're members of their wine club, or we just really, really love the Pinot Noir that they make. We've worked with, and for the most part, they're pretty small scale, just because we're not making too much of this. But Bergstrom is one of our partners. Dominio 4 is also another great partner of ours. We've worked with Bodecker Wine as well. Bodecker is really fantastic. Remy Wines is another one that we've worked with. And, Antica Terra is another one that's really fantastic. They're very, very small scale, make incredibly good wines. And we just kind of work with a handful of smaller winemakers here in Oregon that we really, really love. As far as the color, I think maybe because your samples are on the smaller size, and I don't know if you can see this on your tiny screen, but the Pinot does actually have a much redder color to it. It really does. When you see it in like a larger volume, it does pick up quite a bit of color from that. But, also Pinot Noir is, as far as red grapes go, as far as that kind of, style of wine, it is on the lighter side. So you're not going to get pick up a lot of, heavy red hues like you would with, say, a Cabernet or a Tempranillo or something like that. That's a heavier, more, jammy grape, or like a Syrah, would really add a lot to it. Syrahs can almost be that kind of inky purple sometimes, so Pinot Noir is definitely on the lighter side, but it does actually pick up quite a bit of color in the barrel for sure. Great question.
Thanks, Miles. I'm definitely going to have to buy the 2 bottles together and do more tastings.
Absolutely. That's, and that's what I love about these different finish expressions too. They still represent Westward and the characteristics of the whiskey and what we're trying to accomplish with it, but they're variations. They're still different enough that you can enjoy them in different ways. Like for me, I love the original in a highball. I love stout neat. I love to put Pinot in an old fashioned. It's just dynamite. Really, really good in that way for sure. But obviously, we drink it however we like.
Any plans of using local oak, the oak local to your region?
So we have tried that, yeah. So you're talking about, Quercus Garryana is cool. Or what people call Oregon oak. It grows through Northern California, all through Oregon and up into Washington, along the coast there. We have actually, that's cooperage I mentioned before, Oregon Barrel Works. I had them make for Quercus Garryana some Oregon oak barrels for us. It's an interesting oak. I don't know if anyone's had any whiskey aged in Garryana. Garryana is really assertive. It's heavy on the wood. You have? Yeah.
It's right behind me there.
Oh, yeah. So Garryana to me it's very assertive. It's got a lot of strong oak. I get, kind of these like solventy, almost felt pen notes from it. Even some like liquid smoke kind of barbecue notes as well, right? So, that's to me, those knock Westward out of balance a little bit, and I think kind of overtake the whiskey a little too much. I know some people that do actually bottle Garryana, that do have a Garryana expression in their brand. And they blend in a very, very small amount, like maybe 5 to 10% of the entire blend is Garryana. It's just it's that assertive, like a very small amount goes a really long way.
Yeah, because it has a straight grain and it's uneven, so it tends to. So it's a very aggressive, but it's interesting.
It is. I love how it's very divisive. I feel like there's some people that absolutely adore it, and there's some people that just can't stand it. And I think it's really fascinating in that way. So, the barrels that we had that were made of Garryana, that was part of an all Oregon batch that we made. So in Central Oregon, when you get over the Cascade Mountains into Eastern Oregon, it's desert. It's high elevation grasslands, and then even higher elevation desert with buttes and canyons, tons of sun all year round. And there's a grain grower out there called Mecca Grade Estate Malt. 5th generation grain growers out there, and they actually malt their grain on the farm there on site. So we got all our grain from them. We used these Gariana barrels. We used an ale yeast strain from a Portland yeast lab. We just went all Oregon on this batch, and it's really fantastic in a lot of ways. But yeah, that Gariana is super assertive. I don't know if anyone here is a member of our club, or if you've heard of our club, but Westward does actually have a club that we run ourselves. And 4 times a year, we release a one-off, never before seen kind of experimental batch. And this has become my avenue for releasing a lot of these one-offs that we've been doing over the last 10 years or so. And the next release coming up in May will actually have a portion of that all Oregon Gariana whiskey in it.
Yeah, no, your problem is you don't ship it to most states. That's I was planning to join. Yeah, shipping
Yeah,
is-
well,
No.
so I know right now we're in at least 30 states.
Yeah.
So
So
let's-
it depends
yeah,
on when
maybe-
you. Sorry, go ahead, Miles.
Oh, I would say check again. Yeah, because
Yeah.
we're opening new states almost every day with the club. So yeah, if you go to westwardwhiskey.com and check out the club, it's free to join. And yeah, you can see if we'll ship. And like I said, we're making an effort because last August we went nationwide. So before that we were Oregon only, but last year's Q3 release we went nationwide. So we're opening states almost every week. So check it out for sure.
Yeah. My introduction was through Benny's your Benny's barrel pick. I've been picking every year. I've been picking at least one bottle from Benny's picks. I love the 305 cask number. It was
Oh,
amazing.
fantastic.
I think now
Excellent.
this one, I've yet to open this. This is, I think I cannot, I need my glasses. This, I've yet to open it. Yeah, this is 305. I've tried 257. Yeah, that
Yeah.
one is awesome. I mean, I'm totally sold out on your Benny's program. I pretty much hunt for those every time you release it there.
Yeah, well, they're great. They're fantastic to work with as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a great segue into our 4th sample. Everyone would like to get that one, which is our cask strength Westward, and that is actually the Benny's pick. And most of the single barrels that we sell are at cask strength. That's where everybody really likes to pick them. So yeah, purple label, 4th sample, Westward American Single Malt cask strength. This is at 125 proof. You know, you'd ask earlier, Kenyon, what our entry proof was, 125. So this is Westward in its pure, unadulterated form right here.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just got an amazing nose on it. Yeah. So,
You offer
you know,
this. You offer the cask strength as a standard or only as a single barrel?
No, it's part of our lineup. So all 4 that we're tasting tonight are actually our core expressions that you can find. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, we released this, you know, just wanting to put it out there. It seems like there's a lot more interest for whiskey appreciators and consumers into cask strength or higher proof offerings. And we've always loved it at 125. To me, it's still very smooth. You get more pronounced characteristics of Westward, some of those hallmark flavor characteristics, but a little more heat and just a bit more pronounced. But to me, still balanced, still smooth, still very, very drinkable.
Yeah, the thing I like, it doesn't drink 125. It drinks much lower.
It's dangerously smooth. Yeah.
Yeah.
It can sneak up on you for sure.
That's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, and this is a fun one too. I think again, as we get more people interested in whiskey, and consumers are becoming more educated about whiskey, that there seems to be more of a demand for a higher proof offering. And yeah, this is no exception. We took double gold with this at SF Spirits Comp. This is a really fun one.
Yeah.
And you're
What I
saying
like
that
about
all 4 of these are available at Benny's?
yeah, I've seen them at Benny's. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I've seen these on Steelbacks, a few other sites nationally. Would you say that the single barrel, the cask strength, if it's a single barrel, is going to be consistent with what I'm tasting now, or are there going to be big differences?
So yeah, as far as like our standard cask strength goes, this is what to expect. Yeah, but when it comes to single barrels, that's where it gets really individualistic, right? So every single barrel of whiskey, has its own personality. And as the head blender, that's kind of the fun and the torture of my job is, every single barrel is a little different. And every single time we blend, to go into a bottling, we're striving for consistency. But that's where the single barrel program is actually a lot of fun because, each of these barrels, they develop their own idiosyncrasies, and some can be a bit more pronounced with chocolates. I find a few that have a lot more of like the mango or really good like tropical fruit notes. Some are just unbelievably balanced on their own. So there's no real method to actually selecting barrels that could be candidates for the single barrel program. It's just that they're exceptional, that we find them on their own to be really, really fantastic, and they can actually stand on their own. So if you do come across, a single barrel expression out there, online or in a shop or through a whiskey club, it's probably going to be just a little different. And of course, I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you about why they're different. Each of our salespeople has a kit. It's actually this kit right here. This is like
what is that?
This is the single barrel kit. So they bring samples to accounts and different buyers. We also have people come here. We'll actually fly people to Portland for a couple of days. They'll come to the barrel house with me, and we'll sit and we'll taste through 10 or 15 different single barrels and find something they really like. Yeah. So I mean, like I said, the single barrels definitely can vary, and I think that's the appeal for a lot of people, and that's a big part of the fun is each of these barrels just kind of has their own personality.
I think we'll all volunteer to be flown out to help you out.
Let's do it. Let's do some barrel picks. Yeah.
To be honest,
my focus is primarily American single malt whiskeys. Ever since I got introduced to yours and Westland, I've been a total convert. I've stopped buying Scotch whiskeys. I'll be very honest.
Okay.
Yeah, the only Scotch I buy is peated. I mean, I love the Isla peach, so that's never going to go out of fashion on my bar. But American single malts are truly arriving. I mean, and I want to be the first one in the game before the taters come in and start hoarding them.
We truly are in a pretty special moment for American single malt right now, actually. Like I said, we've been at it for quite a while. And now with well over 150 producers of single malt in the States, it's a really exciting time. We're seeing independent bottlers pop up who are, buying single malts from different places, making their own blends and vatted malts. And then also, we're establishing this as a designation, as a recognized category by the TTB, which is, the government arm that really, guides and controls a lot of what goes on with spirits. So, it's what's called a standard of identity. So like bourbon actually has some standards, to say, on your label, if you want to call it bourbon, it must be 51% corn or more, aged in New York for at least 2 years. There's these guidelines that people have to follow. The term American single malt isn't actually in those standards of identity, but we actually helped introduce that. So about 6 years ago, we helped form the American Single Malt Whiskey Commission with five other different single malt makers in the States. And since then, it's been our primary goal with that organization to set down some guidelines and then do the lobbying and help push legislation through to actually get this as a recognized designation. And we heard at the end of last year that it's actually going to go through this year, and it will be an official designation. American single malt will be a recognized term.
Miles, for what it's worth, Miles, I saw that Brown-Forman and Jack Daniels is coming out with a single malt whiskey. So when you talk about a company that big finally pushing this in America, I mean, you've arrived. That's a big deal.
You know what? I just saw that also the other day, the Jack Daniels PX Sherry finish or whatever. Yeah, that's it, right? And they're using that term, not malt whiskey or single malt. They're using American single malt. Yeah. So as you say, the moment has arrived. We are here. It's been an uphill battle for a long time, but we're there. And I think in setting down some guidelines, we don't want to be super restrictive. Like in Scotland, there's more rules about what you can't do than what you can do to make it whiskey and to be able to call it Scotch whiskey. We think that the experimentation is really the most compelling part about craft whiskey. We never want to hinder anyone's creativity, but also, to have some standards, to have some guidelines. I think it's good for consumer protection. It's good for consumer understanding, and it's good for the makers to have at least some kind of standard. We often say handrails, not handcuffs. These are guidelines. These are here to help people understand what we're doing, and for us as makers to have some standards. So the guidelines are pretty simple. Really leaves a lot open to experimentation and interpretation, but they must be made in the United States, must be made of 100% malted barley, must be mashed, fermented, and distilled by one distillery. But that doesn't mean they can't sell it to someone else, because it also, we also say that it must be put into oak containers no larger than 700 liters. And that's probably the biggest one of all of these different guidelines, because for the most part, to make whiskey here, to follow some standard of identity, you have to go into virgin charred American oak. Whereas with this ruling, we're saying it can be used, and it can be any size barrel, anywhere from a 5 liter up to 700 liters, and anywhere in between. New or used oak, go for it. And I think that just leaves a lot of that open for people to experiment with different sizes, ages, maturation techniques.
Any plans to come out with a smoky expression?
Smoky expression.
Smoke
So
wagon.
yeah, nothing's ever off limit, really. We're never going to say no about what we aren't going to do, because that's no fun. But at the same time, we are very much inspired by and take a lot of inspiration for our flavor in the whiskey from our surroundings. There's not really any peat bogs in Oregon, so I don't really see us doing a peat expression or like a peated whiskey. But something that's really great around here that we have some maltsters experimenting with are different wood that they're smoking malts with. So we have coastal alder here, which is a beautiful wood. And we've got maltsters here smoking their grains with alder, with different various, Pacific Northwest trees. And so, that's actually in the works right now. We've got some smoked whiskeys in the works.
Yeah.
Any chance you'll be distributing to Virginia?
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised we're not there. So, it's as a smaller producer, as we venture out more and more, each state has its own rules and regulations and tiered systems and distributors and what you can do and what you can't do. So there's a lot of hoops to jump through. So we're kind of we're tackling it state by state right now, but we'll get there. Claire,
If I can share, for what it's worth, and I'm in North Carolina, and you guys don't ship here directly, but there are at least 2 groups that I'm affiliated with that are bourbon clubs that do have single barrels of yours that will ship here. There are plenty of national sites that'll ship to states that don't, or that have workarounds. So you just got to work with the groups you have or with the sites themselves, and there are definitely ways to make it work.
That's good to know. Yeah. Luckily in Chicago, we don't have to worry about. This is Mecca. This is Mecca for bourbon, whiskey, whatever lovers. Yeah.
I'm going out tonight to Binny's, and I'm coming home with something. So.
No,
I wish I had Binny's down here. I mean, I'm jealous.
Steve, don't. If you get the one from 305, please get a couple, because Binny's is running low on stock. But the only one you'll find is at the Glencoe.
Okay, a little bit of a road trip.
Yeah.
Sounds like you might need to do another pick with Binny's.
Out of all this, the thing that I'm most impressed with, I come from a culinary background, and one of the rules I've always played by is that you never call out a flavor profile for a menu item if you don't see it, feel it, and taste it. If it's not there, don't add the ingredient. It means it's not necessary. So when I picked up this little bottle that said Pinot cask, I thought it was a hopeless thing. There's no way that you are going to be able to make that flavor profile come through in this product And man, I'm blown away that the delicate fruit that is very much Pinot Noir is in this sample. I'm so impressed with that. The stout is the same story. I mean, you see that sort of thing as well, but I feel like that's easier to make it come through. I could be wrong on that, but I'm really impressed. What you said you did, and they're both
Thank
delicious.
you. Man, that's how we do it. I mean, we are, like I said, I want the finishes to accent and highlight what's already there with the whiskey. But again, spending an entire year in those secondary barrels, they're going to pick up those characteristics. And yeah, I mean, we experiment a lot with different barrels, with different grains, with yeasts even. As ex-brewers, we love to experiment with different beer strains. Actually, a release we did last year, I'd used a Belgian farmhouse Ardennes ale yeast to ferment that whiskey out about 6 years ago. And yeah, as you say, I mean, if you're going to put that in the name, it better taste like that. That should be there for sure. And I think we can do that by, again, just taking this really minimalist approach to distillation, really just with our great raw materials and how we do things at the beginning of the processes, and then putting our trust in the distillation process and how that goes. Yeah, all that comes through. Absolutely. The Pinot Noir is so much fun. It's tricky as a blender because we're using 4 or 5 different winemakers. And, when it comes to wine, as opposed to beer, where, I mean, I've worked with over 40 breweries for the stout cast, but, with brewers, there's a recipe that you follow. I mean, you have a bit of your own style and your own take, but this is how you make stout, and it's this way, and you use these roasted grains, and, there's a formula to it. Whereas with wine and winemakers, it isn't, someone's following a recipe or standard of this is how you make Pinot Noir. Every single winemaker, is saying, this is how I make Pinot Noir. This is my interpretation of it. This is my style. This is how I like it. They're going to put their stamp on that. And so when I get these barrels, working with a few different winemakers, there's some definite differences between each one. So it's fun, but also sometimes a bit maddening trying to, bring all these different characteristics from these winemakers together in the Pinot finish for sure.
You're hitting these very well. And I mean, my wife is already in love with the Pinot. So that's a gimme. That's going to happen. There's the nose to it. There's the taste. There's a creaminess. There's all different fashions and amazing. You guys have hit it home run.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. I mean, it's great to have this feedback. And when it comes to making whiskey and experimentation, for me as the head blender, at the end of the day, it is, does it taste good and is it balanced? Because otherwise, you're just kind of experimenting for the sake of experimentation, which to me, there's really no point. I mean, we have a vision, we have goals in mind. And yeah, really we want to introduce everyone to what American single malt could be. And so it should be approachable. It should be balanced, and it should be enjoyed by everyone. And yeah, we're just we're here to just plant the flag in the ground for American single malt. Really.
Yeah.
Miles, we have a comment about an IPA release. I feel like we've done that in the past, have we?
We did, yeah. That was one of our first ever club releases, which was just through our tasting rooms. So that's wild. That I don't know if whoever asked about that has tried it. Yeah, we did some IPA finish. This was quite a journey. I mean, I think we just had to try it because being ex-brewers and being in the Pacific Northwest, we couldn't not do it. But we did it in a way that, again, had vision. We didn't just give a whiskey barrel to a brewery to put IPA in. That just didn't seem like a really good flavor match right off the bat. So what we did was we aged gin in our whiskey barrel. And then after a year of aging gin, we then gave the barrel to the brewery.
Leave. No.
Pardon?
I think Akiba doesn't realize he's on.
I apologize, guys. No, I'm sorry, guys. Sorry, guys. You're good. You're good. I'll mute. Sorry, guys.
No, one thing I have to say is a vintner has never let me down. A vintner turned distiller has never let me down.
Yeah.
Someone who's transitioned from winemaking into distilling has always excelled at it. I don't know why, but something about winemaking that makes for an excellent distiller.
I like that. Well, and I think between brewing and winemaking and distillation, there's a lot of similar concepts, right? Obviously, each one has a lot more nuance, that's specific to the way you make it. But I think you can absolutely apply any of the knowledge you have from one to another. And I think that's kind of like a really big point of differentiation for us, for Westward, is that we're heavily inspired by beer and so much technique, and so much, process and, maturation technique that we use. I mean, they're inspired by so many things, not just beer, but cognac. I'm a huge fan of brandy. I love cognacs.
Oh, I love it.
And so when you get into my barrel house here, I practice élevage. I coupe barrels. A lot of what I'm doing with maturation and blending is inspired by cognac. So I think that's what's really exciting about the American single malt category is we're taking inspiration from all these different areas. And, we have a reverence for whiskey. We just have so much respect for it. But we also, want to push the category forward. We think there's so much more that you can do with whiskey. I mean, really, I think we're just scratching the surface. I really do. But yeah, if anyone's tried our IPA finish, I think it's long gone now. But yeah, that was whiskey, then gin, and then an IPA from Breakside, which is a great brewery here in Oregon. And then they gave it back to us, and we aged for some more time in that. So that was a lot of fun. We actually had a couple barrels that I just kind of tucked away, and someone just bought the last of our IPA finish the other day. So keep an eye out for that. If you're on the online platforms like Drizzly and such, keep an eye out for an emerging Westward IPA finish coming out there pretty soon.
Miles, we have a question about whether you have a favorite.
If I have a favorite?
Yes,
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Original. This is what it's all about. This right here, everything stems off this one. We've been making this for 12 years. This was the inspiration for starting the distillery back in 2004. This is what it's all about right here. To me, this showcases everything. The Great Pacific Northwest barley, the way that our malts, there handles it, the fermentation flavors. You get just this really great, vanilla, coconut, spice from the barrel. Yeah, it's just all right here. When I'm blending this, it varies a little bit here and there, but I know I'm getting close to the original flavor profile. Has anyone ever put fresh cracked pepper on a mango? If you haven't, yeah, okay. I know I'm getting close to my final blend palette when I'm getting cracked pepper on a mango with this.
I grew up in the mango region of India, the coastal part of India.
Fantastic.
We used to have a few mango trees growing in our backyard. So
amazing.
Yeah. So we are never.
Yeah, Ken is the lucky Indian, and I'm the not so lucky Indian, but we do both love mangoes.
My house is never without mango here. I mean, if I go upstairs in the kitchen, you'll find at least half a dozen mangoes in my.
I love it. So yeah, again, just no brainer. This is for me because everything else that we've tried, they're extensions of this one here. Yeah, this to me is what American single malt is all about right here. Definitely, without a doubt.
Anyway, fellows, really appreciate all of you letting us joining us for this tasting, and Claire and Miles, I really appreciate for using our platform too. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. You guys really
been an
hit it out of the
pleasure.
park.